Joining us this morning for more on that bill is West Texas Congressman Jodey Arrington. Congressman, pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us.
You bet. Good to be with you.
Over the summer, we saw violent riots in cities throughout the country, many in cities in Texas, but the left and then candidate Joe Biden refused to acknowledge those as they were happening. Even after an innocent retired 77-year-old police captain David Dorn was killed in June. I believe that was in St. Louis. No one did anything. I understand that you introduced a bill just after that, the David Dorn Act, that would protect police and finally hold rioters, not protesters, but rioters accountable. Whatever happened to that bill?
Well, we didn't get a single Democrat to support it. Surprise, surprise. They're too busy obsessing over defunding the police and trying to implement their radical agenda, which includes a federal takeover of policing. This would hamstring our police officers. This would jeopardize their safety as they're protecting our neighborhoods. Look, the vast majority of police in this country are noble and good and well-trained and professional. And meanwhile, the Democrats are making them the bad guys in this bill, which would hamstring them to do their job. And in fact, I think by taking the legal liability protections, which is one provision, the qualified immunity, by stripping law enforcement of that, they will destroy law enforcement in this country as we know it. Meanwhile, my legislation would increase the penalty for rioting. It would increase the penalty for assaulting a law enforcement officer. And it's a sad day in America when we're not trying to find ways to support these brave men and women who are protecting and serving our families and our communities. Instead, we're tearing them down and we're stripping them of the tools that they need to do their job effectively.
Yeah, and it cuts both ways. It would affect any of the rioters on January 6th. It would affect any of the rioters throughout the summer in Chaz and in the city of Minneapolis. You know, just ironic that the city that started the defund the police movement is now giving police more funding to recruit young cadets. Nobody wants to work there. I can't say I blame them. Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, she famously said that walls were immoral. She banged that drum for 4 years when Donald Trump was in office. My question to you, why do we still have big walls around the Capitol and the White House? You can't get, I was just in Washington a couple of weeks ago, you can't get anywhere near the White House right now. Joe Biden is like totally insulated.
She's turned our nation's capital into a Soviet-style military state. It looks more like a maximum security prison, and no surprise that Pelosi thinks walls are immoral until she fears for her life. She thinks that police should be defunded unless her life is at risk. So it's hypocrisy at its worst. It's a double standard. I mean, the Democrats are taking funding for border walls that protect communities along the border, like in my home state of Texas, but she's got razor wire fencing all over this beautiful Capitol complex. And there's really no threat at this time. If there were, then we would all support whatever measures that needed to be in place. But
almost 2 months later, too.
Yeah, and this is a prop in Pelosi's theater. And it just propagates her narrative about what happened on the 6th and trying to impugn the president and looking backwards. It's silly. It's a waste of taxpayer money, and it's shameful for the citizens of this country and the people's house.
Yeah, it's cost so far up to almost $500 million, about $7 million a day for the American taxpayers. I want to talk about H.R. 1 for a moment here. I know that you are in favor of the Save Democracy Act. President Trump spoke on Sunday night, and he said something that I totally agreed with. If you're in the military or have got a health condition, I get it. But we've got one election day, and it's always been the first Tuesday in November. Shouldn't that be the case moving forward?
Absolutely, Rob. I think the American people understand that election integrity is paramount, and folks who are physically able ought to go to the polling booths and cast their ballots. They ought to be able to validate their identity, and they ought to be able to register to vote. But what we saw in 2020 was an absolute disaster of epic proportions. And forget the outcome, the public confidence is completely wrecked, which is a disaster in and of itself. And meanwhile, the Democrats' solution to this is to codify in law all these horrible election rule changes, some of them done unconstitutionally. They want to make the California election code the mainstay of this republic. They want to take over the elections and federalize elections, which in the Constitution are clearly delegated to the states and local government. So we need safeguards. We don't need to just open up more of this reckless election system that we saw in 2020.
And a permanent Democratic America as well. You know, they want to make Washington, D.C. a state. Congressman, I appreciate you coming on with us this morning. That's Congressman Jodey Arrington. I'd love to have you back on very soon. I could talk about the 28th Amendment with you all day. You are one of the few members of the House that is in favor of term limits on Congress, one of the few out of 435. So that is pretty amazing in and of itself. Come back and see us, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.